In Lesson 3, one of the objectives is to learn how to compute graduated commission. Now you also learn how to compute straight commission, but that's not going to be the focus of this video. So again, we're going to focus on computing graduated commission. Let's do a brief introduction before we get into that. So first of all, remember that commission is an amount of money being paid for selling a product or service. When a salesperson sells a product or service, for example, a car, that salesperson is getting a commission, a percent of the cost of that item back to them as payment, right? And so now that kind of helps us understand why a salesperson might try to encourage you to spend more money on a better project or fancier service, because the more money you spend, the more money they get back in their pocket as payment. Graduated commission is an idea that as this salesperson is reaching higher and higher levels of sales, we're going to give them more and more money for doing it. So maybe the first chunk of sales, they're getting a certain level of commission. For example, maybe they're getting 5% of the total sale back in their pocket. But as this person keeps achieving higher and higher, the more sales they make, their employer might give them an incentive and say, you know, once you reach this level of sales, I'll kick up your commission percent to 10% or something like that, right? And of course, the higher the commission rate for the salesperson, the more money they're making. Straight commission is commission pay where their paycheck is only coming from commission alone. You'll also see problems that discuss base pay, which is pay that they get no matter what, even if they don't make a single sale. And finally, commission rate, again, is that specified percentage, that specified amount of money paid for each sale. For the most part, in all of your questions, that commission rate, keyword rate, will be presented to you as a percentage. Get used to, whenever you see a term that has the word rate in it, expect to see either a percentage or some sort of decimal amount, okay? And you'll know that that number is some sort of rate. So with those ideas in mind, let's move forward. As I said, the focus of this video is graduated commission, but to warm up, let's just do one example of calculating straight commission, and then we'll dive into graduated. So let's say Alexa sells cars. She earns 3% straight commission on each car sale. And she recently sold a car for $45,000. And we want to know, what is her straight commission? What's that money that she is making just for selling that car? Our straight commission formula is that we take the rate, the commission rate, times the total cost or total sale, and that tells us how much she'll be paid. So in this instance, we can see that the price of the car, her sales, were $45,000. That's representing total cost, okay? So again, it could be cost of a single item. They might tell you the sales she made that month or something like that. And then what's the rate? What is our commission rate? They tell us it's 3%. So 3% is the rate. But remember, whenever we're computing with percentages, you have to convert to decimal form before you do your calculation. So when I set this up, you can see that I've converted 3% to 0.03. 3%, I've done 3 divided by 100 to convert from percent to decimal form. So I'm going to take 0.03 times 45,000, and I find that her straight commission is $1,350. So that's straight commission. Now let's look at graduated commission. Christina Marcus sells workout equipment. She earns 5%, and that's a 5% commission, on the first $3,000 in sales, 7% on the next $4,000, and 12% on sales over $7,000. Last month, she sold $22,000 worth of equipment. What was her total commission? So that total commission then is going to be the sum of each of these pieces of commission from each of those levels of sales. One way I like to visualize this is I'll think of a little bar graph that represents Christina's sales from 0 all the way up to 22,000. Okay, and we know that there are certain points at which her commission changes. So, for example, it says after $3,000, after she hits this $3,000 mark, we know her commission amount is going to change. So every penny she sells above that, it says she earns 7% on for the next $4,000. So they're saying that once she hits $3,000, for the next $4,000 in sales, she's making a 7% commission rate. In other words, they're saying that until she hits 7,000, right? So she makes it, so she sells from 0 to 3,000, she gets a certain rate. She hits $3,000, her commission rate bumps up. And then until she hits 7,000, her commission rate bumps up again to 12%. And in fact, why don't we kind of fill in this graph with some colors? So she earns 5% on the first 3,000. So she's selling, and until she hits 3,000, in fact, I'll continue to use my pen there. She's selling all of these sales. She's getting a 5% commission back on. Then she hits 3,000. She sells $3,000 and she hits, she sells a penny more. Now her commission has increased. And what does it increase to? To 7% on the next $4,000 that she sells. So what's happening is that she's earning that commission from here all the way up to here. So notice that because we've already paid her commission for that first $3,000, she's not getting paid like double commission on this, right? It's just for that chunk of money between $3,000 and $7,000. Then when she hits $7,000, she gets 12% on all sales above $7,000. So from there, the cap, there is no cap. Everything above $7,000, she just keeps going up and she keeps making that rate from there on out. Now we need to set this up and figure out her commission for each of those, the dollar amount of her commission for each of those chunks in different rates. So here's what we'll do. We'll split it into 3, and we're going to find the commission for that red part of the graph, the first $3,000. Then we'll find her commission on the next $4,000, that blue part of the graph. And then we'll find her commission on sales over 7,000, that green part of the graph. So when we set that up, what does that look like? Well, one thing you can do is kind of use the boundaries that they've given you to help set it up. So I know from the last slide that to find commission, you take the rate times the amount, right? It was the rate times the sales amount. So I know that for this red area, it's going to be whatever the rate is times 3,000, right? And I know for the blue area, it's going to be my rate of 7% times 4,000. And then I know for the last area, that commission will be the rate times however much money she made past $7,000. So when I plug that in, here's what that looks like. And let's go through this kind of chunk by chunk. So remember, she earned $5,000 or 5% on the first $3,000 in sales. So she earned 5%, 0.05 on the first $3,000 in sales. So this little piece within the parentheses is representing that part of the prompt, that chunk of red on the graph, okay? So we leave that alone. That's one chunk of her commission. And then she has this other piece, which is where she earned 7% on the next $4,000 that she sold. So 7%, 0.07 in decimal form, on the next $4,000 in sales. And finally, and this is really the only kind of tricky part, is that she earns 12% on the sales past that. So we do have to do a quick calculation to figure out this number. So remember that she sold $22,000 total. So to figure out what number to put here, we're basically asking ourselves, what's the amount of money that we haven't given her commission on yet? Remember that this red piece was commission on the first $3,000. So she's already earned commission on that $3,000, right? And then the next chunk, that 7%, was commission on the next $4,000. So she's earned commission on that $4,000 as well. So notice that what I did was I started with her total sales of 22,000, and then I just subtracted off the money that she's already made commission on. She already made commission on the first 3,000. She already made commission on the next $4,000 after that, but that left $15,000 that she hasn't earned commission on yet. That's the number I'm plugging in here. The sales by which she exceeded $7,000, right? How much more money did she spend or did she sell than 7,000? She sold $15,000 above that, right? So $15,000 is what we plug in. Again, one more time, you find that number by taking the total sales and subtracting off the money she's already made commission on. And then, of course, plugging in the appropriate rate, which in this case is 12% or 0.12. So we've got our three chunks. Now you simplify. I would just simplify this stuff in the parentheses and then take your final sum. And we find that her total commission was $2,230. Now let's go through two more examples of this. I'll go through it a little bit quicker. I think once you have a little bit of practice with this, you'll find it much more straightforward than it appears. So here we go. Let's say Omara sells tires at a car service center. She earns 8% commission on the first $1,000 in sales, 13% on the next $1,500, and 18% on sales of more than $2,500. Last month, she sold $14,000 worth of tires, and we want to know what was her total commission. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll even set up, I know they mentioned 3 commission levels, so I'll even kind of set up, since I know I need to take the sum of commission for each level, I'll set up my 3 little sets of parentheses. And I know that for each one, it'll be sum rate times the sale amount. And I'll just take it piece by piece. So for example, if I look at the first part, it says that she earned 8% commission on the first $1,000 in sales. So I'll stop right there and I'll represent that in my formula. She earned 8% commission off of $1,000. What does that look like? Well, that would be 0.08 times 1,000. Perfect. Then I'll continue. And it says that she earned 13% commission on the next $1,500 in sales. So I'll stop right there and plug that in. 13% is 0.13 multiplied by 1,500. And finally, we have our last set of parentheses. It says that she earns 18% on sales of more than 2,500. And she sold 14,000 worth of tires that month. So first let's plug in the rate because that's pretty straightforward. We know it's 0.18, it's 18%. What am I multiplying by? Well, I'm multiplying by however much she exceeded 2,500, or you can think of it as the money she hasn't earned commission on yet. So to figure that out, I'm going to take her total sales of 14,000 and I'm just going to subtract off the stuff she's already getting commission on because we don't want to give her double commission, right? So we're subtracting off that 1,000, we're subtracting off that 1,500. And that's how we find that number. And then just to show it to you written a little more neatly, here's where we're at. So I jumped right to this line. We have our 0.08 times 1,000 plus 0.13 times 1,500 plus 0.18 times 11,500, right? And if I simplify this, that's what I would get, 11,500. So once you've done this setup, I think this is the hardest part. From here, you just have to carefully simplify. One more thing to point out, which is notice that we are adding each of these chunks together, right? We're taking the sum of each of her individual commissions. We're not multiplying these together. So I simplify from here, and I find that her total commission is $2,345. Let's look at one last example to conclude today. So Kari sells office appliances, and she earns 6% commission on the first 4,000, 8% on the next 4,000, and 12% on sales more than 8,000. Last month, she sold $15,000 worth of appliances, and once again, we're looking for her total. So let's set this up just like before. I'm going to set up my 3 sets. Once again, we had 3 different commission levels. So I'll set up my 3 sets of parentheses. And you might like to do this differently. I like doing each set one at a time. I know some students prefer plugging in all the rates and then going back and plugging in all the sales amounts. It's totally up to you, whatever you think, whatever helps you organize. So let's look at the first part. She earned 6% commission on the first $4,000 in sales. So how am I going to represent that in the parentheses? Well, I'll do the rate, which is 0.06, multiplied by the sale amount of 4,000. Now let's look at the next section. She earns 8% on the next $4,000 in sales. So once again, we'll have our rate, which is 0.08 times the sale amount, $4,000. And finally, our last chunk, which requires a little extra effort, it says 12% on sales of more than $8,000. So we also need to know that her grand total was $15,000. Okay, so let's figure this out. We know that the rate is 12%, and I can plug that in right away. What is the amount that will go here? Sales over 8,000. So by how much did she go over 8,000? Well, her grand total was 15,000. We already accounted for this 4,000. We can subtract that off. We already accounted for that 4,000. We can subtract that off. 15,000 minus 4,000 is, minus 8,000 is 7,000. And that's the number that we'll plug in here. And just to show you a written representation, this is the step we're at here. These earlier steps, these are just kind of broken down even further. If you want to review those, you go ahead and pause the video and kind of read through them. To me, it's easiest just to kind of think about going straight to this construction. So here's what we have. It looks like it matches what we came up with above right here. And from here, simplify. And again, one last time I'll say, I recommend simplifying this number, then simplifying this, then simplifying this, which will bring you to that step. And then as your last step, just adding those 3 sums together. I think that'll help you avoid calculator mistakes. Okay, that's it on computing graduated commission from lesson 3.